Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Unstoppable Dad Project. Thank you once again for joining me here on the podcast for another week. This week, we have another one of our guest series where I interview Lenora Edwards. Lenora is a speech pathologist. She works with families and children, and I thought this might have been a really valuable conversation for those of you that maybe have that feeling that your child may need a little bit of extra help or extra guidance, because at the end of the day, as a parent, we can't do it all on our own. We need to be able to find and source experts that are able to help us with areas that maybe we struggle with ourselves or that we're not experts in. So this conversation with Lenora is great. We dive into a lot of different topics, and there are a lot of different usable tips and actions that you can take as a parent moving forward. So one of the things that I really enjoyed that Lenora said in here quite a number of times is to trust your intuition as a parent. And I felt that that was a really valuable message and something that sometimes we need to hear, because we know that maybe something needs to be done. And sometimes we let other voices impact what actions we're going to take. So I hope you enjoy this conversation as much as I did. And I hope there are some things in here which you can get out of it and you can carry on into your own life. So now my conversation with Lenora Edwards. Enjoy. All right, Lenora, thanks so much for joining me on the podcast. I really appreciate your time. Do you want to just start off by letting the listeners know the Lenora Edwards Better Speech story? What's brought you to the point that you're at now?
Right now, I am a board-certified speech-language pathologist with Better Speech. And if you rewind a few years, I actually started out in nursing. So I started to go to school to be a nurse. And after 2 years of general education credits, I realized that it just quite wasn't aligned with where I was and what I wanted to do. And one of the things that I did enjoy doing was I enjoyed babysitting, especially for a little girl who had communication difficulties. And I had remembered, learning a bit of sign language to help communicate with her as I was growing up and watching over her. And I took myself from one building, which is the nursing building, over to the speech pathology building. And that's how I ended up going into the field of speech pathology, is just really following things that I found enjoyable. And it all started with sign language.
Wow, that's a really cool story. How working with children predominantly,
Mm-hmm.
how do you find the children that need the speech pathology? How do you find the parent? Obviously, this podcast being tailored towards parents and mostly dads that listen to this. What's the main interaction that gets a parent to bring their child to you to work with them through speech difficulties and things like that?
A lot of the time, parents will tell me, guardians will tell me that something just isn't quite right. They don't know what it is. They're just following their instincts, and is their child speaking enough? Are they clear enough? Something just isn't quite right. And I think that's a really good thing, because they're listening to their instincts and they're listening to that intuition that keeps them awake at 2 a.m. going, you know what? I'm not sure. I keep asking people, I keep Googling something, and I still don't know. And I love that, because it truly is letting them build that trust with themselves that says, you know what? I'm the parent, I'm the guardian. I'm hearing other people. I'm just not quite convinced. Let me go to a professional. And that's a great thing, because as a professional, we're skilled, we're specifically trained to notice language development, to notice speech patterns. As a parent and a guardian, it's a completely different story. You might not have that background training, nor why would you know everything under the sun about a child's development? That's why there's a support system. That's why there are professionals in place. And I love that, because that really allows people to say, you know what, something isn't quite right. Let me investigate. Let me lean into that and figure out what's going on.
And really going to a professional for anything. It's funny you say that. I was actually talking to my daughter. My daughter's 9, and we were having a conversation about, we're going through big emotions at the moment as a 9-year-old girl. We're dealing with a lot of different things, and I sat down with her, and sometimes as parents we're not perfect. We fly off the handle when we shouldn't, and I kind of said to her, I said, look, like one thing that you kind of have to understand about mum and dad, you being our oldest, this is also the first time we've been parents as well too. So not only are you working this out, we're working this out as well too. So we're both going to make mistakes together. Let's try and work through it and make sure that we can learn from it. But relating back to what you just said, I think sometimes parents have to give themselves some grace and go, hey, like you don't know what you don't know, right? So when it comes to the speech side of things, like you said, referring to that expert to go, hey, like something's not quite right, and maybe trusting that intuition around, hey,
Mm-hmm.
there's something missing here that's maybe not quite right. And then getting to someone like yourself to go, okay, like let's work out the X's and O's that we need to in order to formulate a plan to move things forward. What are there certain things that you look for within like their, I guess, major um marks that you're looking for when somebody first comes to you or first brings their child to you around speech?
Absolutely. And I just want to touch on what you had said. When your child is developing and as they're going, especially when it's your first child, you're completely right. They're going through their first experience, but so are you. And to allow yourself that grace that says, hey, I'm human. I'm doing the best I can. And this is simply where we are. I think that's such a beautiful thing because we are allowed to grow through that experience. And we don't have to take on the shame of, I was a bad parent. I did this, I did that. It's, you know what? We had a tough day and it's okay. We're coming back to that resolve and we can have the clarity that says, okay, next time, let's try this. So that way we can truly learn and grow through it. And it doesn't have to be this, you were a bad kid or I was a bad parent. It was simply, we had a tough day and let's try and move forward from that. And that really is so, so important, especially when it comes to communication. And in that, you also get to share with your child that you're, as the adult, not perfect. And especially as children, we're trying to, live up to these standards of our parents and we think we have to be perfect. And for them to honor the fact that they're not perfect and that they're human and that they have emotions too and that they can process things too, it allows kids to see that people can have tough moments and be okay. There doesn't need to have the shame and this guilt that goes through it. And that's really where that emotional intelligence begins to build. And I love that. And I love that you shared that. So thank you so much for being so open about that. When it comes to parents and guardians coming in and saying, hey, we have concerns about our child, the things that we look at right away are their age and also what they're able to do, because it's not so much about what they can't do. Let's figure out what they can do and also mark that to where they should be. Because sometimes it might be, for example, 2 years, between 2 and 3 years old, or even between 2 and 4 years old. We have a huge gap of development. And little ones really do develop at their own rate and pace. And the window for that development is really, really massive. And it can be very functional, can be very appropriate to see a 2.5 or a 3 year old with varying skills, but still considered functional. So when that's occurring, we also look at what is the child getting frustrated with? If the child is getting frustrated because their wants and their needs aren't getting met, what we then run into is them shutting down because they're trying to communicate and people are trying to understand them, but there's a disconnect. When that happens, if people can't understand what that child is wanting or needing and that child can't communicate, you'll see that child retract and you'll see them pull away because they're thinking, well, what's the point? Nobody's getting it anyway. So really it's about creating that space that says, okay, little one is trying to communicate. Parents and guardians are trying to understand them. How can we bridge this? What's going on? How can we support the parents and the guardians? How can we support the child? But also in that therapy session or any therapy session, how can we share all this information and help the family use it when we're not there? Because when you're a speech pathologist, you're there for a microcosm of time, whereas the family, they're there all the time. And really wanting to give that support, especially what I love so much about Better Speech, is that we provide speech therapy services online, which means we get to work with our clients in the space that they're most comfortable. So, for example, I see kids first thing in the morning during their daily routines. They're not coming to me apart from their daily routine. I get to see them in their home as they're going throughout their day, what their room looks like, what their favorite toys are like, and I get to make it really, really functional, which is super, super helpful. And I also see them at the end of the day. The nice thing is that when it comes to speech therapy, you used to have to see them at the end of the day, and maybe they weren't at their best and they had a tough day at school, and now we're taking them into a new environment. Here, we're on their schedule and we're in the place that they're most comfortable, which really allows for massive growth and expansion.
And I'm sure you'd find that by having them in an environment where they're more comfortable, it'd obviously help the child more, but it also help the parent more with implementation of anything that needs to be implemented, post session, right?
Completely. Absolutely. And that's really where it is about making it functional. We want people to understand what we're sharing, but we also want them to be able to apply it. And how are they using it in their everyday life? That's really important.
It's so good that technology's moved in a way that people are able to offer that type of a thing now compared to the traditional, more sterile offering. I was talking to a gentleman from Australia the other week, and he's a therapist. He works with men, adult men, and a lot of his therapy that he does outdoors. Like he does a lot of walk and talk therapy and things like that. And he was saying one of the biggest things when it comes to especially males seeking help is breaking down that stereotype of, hey, you don't have to come into this sterile office, lay down on the couch, and let me psychoanalyze every single thing that's going on.
Mm-hmm.
And to lead into a question, do you find that by offering that sometimes breaks down a lot of barriers for families to kind of take that next step, where in the past having to pack the kid up after school, get them to somewhere to be at an appointment at a particular time when maybe they're not, they haven't had their best day and maybe they're not exhibiting their best self, for lack of a term? Surely that's got to lead into an easier way for the parents to seek help as well.
Very much so. And that's such a great thing because, and I love that they have walk and talk therapy. You're getting the body moving, you're up and moving around, and you're having that conversation in a space that you're most comfortable. It can be quite awkward to go into somebody else's office and also carry in all your problems with you and say, hey, I don't know you, but here's my life story. That can be kind of strange for some people. So to really allow the fluidity of, let's start to change the picture of what therapy looks like. Let's start to change the picture of whether it's speech therapy or, talk therapy, whatever the case may be. Let's start to look at it and make it much more functional for us. And you're absolutely right. If your kid, 5-year-old, goes to school all day and they're done at 3 o'clock, and then you have the parent that's trying to race out of work to pick up their kid, then you pop in the car. Maybe you drive 20, 30 minutes to the clinic, you park, then you have to get out of the car and go and hope to heavens that you have a great session after a really long day in an office that you don't know with a person that you only see for short periods of time. The model does work because we've done it for a number of years. That being said, there can also always be an even better way to do things. And that's where we have technology really coming in to be a very, very helpful tool. And we can say, technology is tough because of all these other things that it gives us. Yes, while that's true, this is also true. It's really, really functional. And we can get to work with people in places on their schedule, in those places that they're most comfortable, and keep it affordable. That's incredible. That's a great thing.
Yeah, affordable's a big one, especially in today's day and age for a lot of people. It's and being able to offer, as you're 100% right with technology, where it can be a curse, but it can be a blessing. And being able to have these types of things easily accessible is definitely something that I think enhances a lot of people's lives rather than detracts from it.
Very much so. I mean, even think about, a quick side note, at the beginning of the pandemic, my grandmother, who was 89, I think at the time, had not used an iPad, had not FaceTimed, and would only talk on the phone. I literally sent her my iPad and I sent her broken down step-by-step instructions so that she could get on the internet herself and she could spend time with family herself. And that, being able to do that, quite literally improves the quality of people's lives massively. We're social creatures to begin with. And the ability to really connect with somebody, not just on the phone, but to connect with their face and to connect with them across the screen, it's a great thing.
And on the connection piece, I guess back to, the child speech therapy.
Mm-hmm.
Do you find that when a child's able to communicate better, there are a lot of other areas in their life that come up due to their ability to be able to connect better with people?
Very much so. Absolutely. So, for example, when your child is actively engaged and they're able to have this back and forth with you, quite literally a give and a receive, because language is two parts. We receive what we're hearing, we understand it, we process it, and then we express it. We give our information back. When a child is able to communicate their wants, their needs, their thoughts, you then get to really play with language. So that's where you start to get into the imaginative play and allowing your child to build on that expansion. Now, if your child is still learning those skills, that's also a great thing because you get to still carry that forward and you get to share with them that creativity, whether that creativity is in a storybook or in songs or in colors and in dancing. That communication piece is so, so, so important because, again, we're naturally social and we're naturally wanting to engage with other people. So we like those foundational skills there first. Can they engage? As in, do they have eye contact? Can they understand this back and forth, this attention to task? Can they effectively tell me what they want or what they need? And as they do, let's build from there.
And that's even something that a lot of adults lack, right? Like it's I've one of the reasons for having this conversation is having owned a gym, before we did that, I was in sales for a while. Communication's been one thing that has it's almost been something that I've geeked out on a little bit, just effective communication, trying to be clear and concise and to the point, even though on this podcast sometimes I'm not. But it's something that even as adults, sometimes we lack the communication. And I have a belief that a lot of interpersonal problems that people have fall back on someone's inability to communicate properly.
Mm-hmm.
And so really setting that up for your kids to be able to do that from an early age is just such a powerful thing, I think, into later life as well too.
Completely. Absolutely. Especially when we're communicating. And one of the things that I don't think people really understand is that the personal growth, that inner experience of knowing yourself better and really examining your thoughts and really looking at that literally helps you be a better communicator. Because you can, when you know yourself, you know for sure if you're effectively communicating or if you're just grasping at straws trying to point a finger. And it was something that I was not taught in school. It was not taught where I grew up. It was literally something that I had to experience my own self and realize, I'm not communicating with my husband in the best way possible. I might be screaming and he might be screaming. And you know what? This just isn't a really great situation. How can we communicate more effectively? Or if I'm saying something and I'm not being heard, it might not be on the other person. It might be on me. And that's the responsibility I have to look at that says, how am I effectively communicating what I need to others? Maybe it's the words I'm using. Maybe it's my tone. Maybe there are other things going on in their life that I'm not paying attention to. And when we can have that emotional ability to really reflect on our own communication skills, every area of our life improves, not just with our children, literally with our significant other, and also in our career.
So you mentioned, when it comes to, I guess, your job title, the behavioral speech therapist,
Mm-hmm.
how much of it is behavioral, and how much of it, I guess, I'm kind of searching for the way to describe this is, I guess genetic, or like how much is environment and how much is genetic
Mhm.
in the work that you do. It does, if you understand where I'm going with that question.
When it comes to children, it depends. Sometimes it is environment, as in, for example, disfluency or stuttering. That's not something people are necessarily born with, as in, it's not a genetic diagnosis such as cerebral palsy. That would be a diagnosis that we would often see as whether they're in utero or as shortly, after birth. Those are markers that we can see, or if there's a shift in their chromosomes, that's genetic. That's a primary diagnosis. Whereas stuttering or disfluency, that's an acquired. It's not necessarily that they were born with it, they happen to develop it, which is totally different. And stuttering often occurs from, it can be genetic, but it can also be environmental, as in there was a shift in the child's environment. Maybe there was a divorce, or maybe a second child was born, or maybe they went to school. Something else happened where now we're seeing disfluencies occur. That being said, it can also be developmentally appropriate. Sometimes children, their brain moves so quickly and their words can't keep up. So we might see some disfluencies. So it really is something that when you're with a speech pathologist, we look at, we examine, and we move forward through that, taking each child into account rather than just here's a label and send them through.
Mm. So everything, it sounds a bit like everything's obviously very context dependent, right? The kids are still going to develop at their own rate, and sometimes what we may perceive as maybe our child developing a little bit slower or things like that may just be something that the child goes through, and that will pick up later on in life and things like that. But by coming to somebody like yourself, we can obviously arm ourselves with the information that we need as they kind of go through those stages.
Completely. Beautifully
So
said.
I'm interested with, obviously, on the parent side of things. We're looking at it from the child's point of view, well, from a child point of view, where there's potentially an issue there with the child that needs to be addressed. They're having trouble communicating. I'm assuming there's a lot of work that you also do with the parents to help them with their communication skills as well.
Absolutely. And that is really helping them understand what their child is doing and how they can better understand their child. And the first thing that I always lead with is they're not doing anything wrong and they're not bad parents. It doesn't make them a bad person, because a lot of the time parents will often think they did something wrong or that it's their fault. And I really lead with that because I want them to understand, especially when we're working with them, there's no shame, there's no guilt. It simply is, this is where we are right now and this is where we want to go. And really doing that helps them understand, again, that they're not bad people. They're not bad parents. There's no guilt and there's no shame. That this is where we are. And now we have a plan. And that really makes all the difference, because they went from this really narrow mindset and a lot of this heavy, heavy emotion to, oh, okay, there is light. And that's a good thing.
And with when a parent comes to you, and in, let's say, in those later stages, you've worked with them initially, you've gotten through to the point where we kind of understand the child's wants and needs, and we're starting to make, I guess, some breakthroughs or some forward steps towards where the what I'm trying to think of the right word to describe this, towards a in a positive direction for the child's development.
Mm-hmm.
After that, is it an ongoing process, as in, are you continuing to work with them, check in again in 6 months time, 12 months time? Is there an end point for the work that you do with the child and with the family?
Those are great questions. So it really depends on where the child is at that point in time. So what are the difficulties that we're noticing? If they're what we consider within functional limits and they might be close to the border of they might need speech therapy. Let's check back in 3 months, or let's check back in 6 months and see where they are. The reason we check back in is because that body and mind are constantly growing. And we want to make sure that it's not just goodbye, see you later. We want that child to succeed just as much as those parents do. So to have them come back and say, let's just touch base, see where we are. Feel free to reach out to me. We absolutely do that. Now, let's say it's another child and they might be having difficulty with their articulation. They might be slurring their words, or they might have a lisp of some sort. We would then pick them up, what we often call, we would then treat them for speech therapy services. And whether that might be for 8 weeks, whether that might be for 12 weeks, whatever it is, until that's resolved, that's what's truly important. And when it comes to articulation and even language, the goal is for them to be what we call age appropriate. We want them to get to those milestones as quickly and effectively as possible, but also independent. Independent would be that I don't have to cue them. I don't have to remind them to make those corrections, that they're naturally fluid. So we work with them until they are age appropriate and until they are independent in that skill, or until it's been effective, as in they're where they need to be. And that way we are keeping our eyes on them if they need to come back, and we're treating them if it's appropriate, if it's warranted.
Yeah, that's great. That's all great information. Is there anything that you would, when it comes to, let's say a parent is, they've seen their child, they've got this kind of niggle in the back, or they've this feeling that like, hey, something's wrong. What are the major hesitations that you see from parents in reaching out for help?
The major hesitation would be that they think they're overthinking it, or that they're comparing it to somebody else and somebody else has now talked them down. So you go to a trusted friend or a trusted family member and you say, this is what I'm seeing. What do you think? And they go, oh no, you're fine. You're fine. You don't need, no, don't bother. You're crazy. And that then takes that adult's autonomy and that adult's perception and kind of twists it a little bit, because they don't want to be thinking they're crazy. They're trying to do their best. But now somebody else might be thinking that they're overreacting. And in that, they might delay reaching out for 3 weeks. They might delay reaching out for 3 months. They might delay reaching out for 6 months, whatever the case may be. And understanding that in that time frame, while they're delaying reaching out to a professional, that child is still growing. They're still developing. Things are still progressing neurologically in that nervous system as appropriate, because they're designed to continue to grow and to develop. When it comes to children, that developmental period is you could say it's a short window, because they're making these massive gains and we're seeing them be able to really understand language and being able to articulate language. It's a short window because they really are growing. And really between those important years of birth to 7 or birth to 8 years, those neural pathways are being created and they're being wired in, and we want to be able to help them, and we don't want to glide past it, because then they're missing information and we have to go back and support them. So it really is important to understand that what might be 3 months time for us or 6 months time for us is a huge gap for children. And it's really, really important that even if you think, you know what, I'm a crazy parent and I just want to get checked just to make myself feel better, and that's okay. That's okay. Reach out to professionals. And if the worst thing that they're telling you is your child's doing great, keep doing what you're doing, that's a great appointment. And then you can sleep even better. And that is a wonderful thing.
And I think, knowing, my son's just turned 5, and he started formal schooling at the start of the year. And even my daughter, like thinking back to when my daughter was the same age, and it is literally like every single day there is a new little thing that they are coming up with, whether it's just something that they say, something that he can, like he's going through that stage where he's learning to read and write, and we've just seen literally in the last week him going from having to ask every single letter and what it looks like to writing like his friends' names on the page, like just,
That's
and you're 100% right. And things can happen so quickly that I think you can get to the point where if you leave it too long, there can also be an instance where and I guess where I'm going with this is there a point with parents where it's never too late to get that help? Like, say for example, if you've had this feeling for multiple years, and then all of a sudden it kind of dawns on you and you're like, you know, shit, I should have done something about this when I first thought about it. But it's probably too late now. Is it one of those things where, hey, it's never too late to actually go and talk to somebody about this?
very much so. It never is too late. And if you're thinking, oh gosh, if I only did this a year ago, if I only did this 2 years ago, it's okay. And I tell this to my clients very, very often, especially my parents. You are always doing the best that you can with the tools, time, and knowledge available to you. If you could have done better, you would have. That's okay. Let's keep going. And being able to help them understand that, again, they didn't do anything wrong. It's not too late. We're here to help. We're here to support you. It really is something that's reassuring. And they get that relief of, it's okay. Let's take the next step. Let's take the next step. And that's the most important, because we want them to keep moving forward. We don't want them curled up thinking they did the worst thing in the world, because they didn't do the worst thing in the world. They were doing their best. And we can keep going forward and helping and supporting them as well as the child, wherever they are.
Yeah, everyone fails at the margins of their experience, right? Like that's going to and that's okay. We can only do the best with the information that we've got. We can't do any better than that. And I guess the thing is, I guess the big message there is, if there is something that you feel maybe needs to be looked at, then go and ask for help. There's no shame in asking for help. And as a parent, everyone's got so much other stuff on their plate that's what people like yourself are around for, to specialize in those areas, to help us as parents and to help other parents out with those things that we may think may be a struggle. Like, you don't have to do this all on your own.
Very much so.
It's and I think that's just such an important message just across the board, not just for speech therapy, but just life in general, right? Like, I think especially as men, obviously predominantly men listen to this podcast, but we've got this ego about asking for help, where we should be we should be able to lead and take care of these things.
Mm-hmm.
And at the end of the day, we're just not equipped to take care of some things. And so we're going to need to ask for help and get help in those areas.
Yeah. And I often think a lot of the time, if you were supposed to do it by yourself, you'd be here by yourself. The nice thing is that there is support. You can ask other people. And in asking other people, I tend to lean toward being careful just who you go up and ask. Reach out to people that you feel that you can trust, and also that are going to support you, which is very different than shame. You want people that are going to support you and uplift you, not necessarily sugarcoat it and like, oh, you're fine, you're crazy, goodbye, but literally support you and saying, how can I help? Here's something that helped me, and being able to go to those other people that are offering those insights in a sincere way and not in a shameful way is the difference that makes all the difference. And I think in doing that, you do get to see those men truly excel in those areas, because they want to be providers. They want to be helpful. They want to protect, and they want to take care. And in doing so, they are, when they reach out to people that they know they will be supported by and that they will be cared for. It's not that, especially as fathers, it's not that you don't know, and it's not that you're wrong. It's, hey, you're not supposed to know. You don't have the degree for it. Why would you know? That's okay. You're supposed to know, hey, something isn't quite right. Let me trust my instincts. Let me trust myself that says, I'm going to go ask for help, and I'm going to learn, and I'm going to grow, and I'm going to then be able to pass that on to the next dad, to the next family. And that is really where that strength comes in.
And it's enhancing that sense of community too, because you're building that network, you're building that connection, which is something that I've spoken a lot about on the podcast, especially for men, is having that community and that connection to inherit, like, you know, with other men and other dads. Like I've done Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu for 8.5 years, and I talk about, like, that's my little community and my tribe. And before that, we owned a gym for 15 years. Like we've had all these great communities in our life over the years, and now with the podcast and the coaching that I do, it's all there. But I think to be able to, especially if you look at it almost from a selfish point of view, to be able to help the communities that you're going back to, there's going to more than likely be somebody in that community that's going to be struggling with a similar thing that you are. Hey, I've got this feeling about my kid too. Hey, where did you go for help? Like, you know, what, and really leaning on that and enhancing that, that's going to not only enhance your relationship with your child, but with the others that in your community as well. So definitely no shame in asking for help when you're not equipped to give the help yourself.
There's a great book out there, and it's called The Selfish Gene. And it basically says that we are genetically wired to be selfish. Now, if we hear this word in our community, a lot of the time it can come up with a lot of shame. But when we start to look at the fact that we are genetically wired to be selfish, as in it moves us forward, it's there to protect us. So when we can say, oh, something's not quite right, I need to give this the attention it deserves, that's a great thing, because we can give it that attention, we can nurture it, we can grow from it, and then we can pass it on. That's phenomenal.
But even from a service point of view, you know, for if it's like having been in the health and fitness coaching space for as long as I have, like it's something that selfish has such a negative connotation to the word. But sometimes we need to be selfish in order to serve others more effectively. You know, there's no point in, as a man, you working yourself to the bone, you know, 80 hours a week to earn this money if your health is suffering in the background and you're going to die you're going to die before you hit 60. There's no point in it. So taking that selfish time, quote unquote, to do something for yourself in order to look after your health so that you can have, you know, those extra years to help your family and guide your family and be there for your family is such an important thing, because it's just selfish doesn't need to have the negative connotation it does.
Not at all. I completely agree, especially if you think of it. You just said to give to your family, to give to others. You can't pour from something that's empty.
No.
Yeah, absolutely. You have to be able to fill yourself and then pass it along to other people.
And you know, back to asking for help, you feel there's something wrong, like leaning into that. And that's that parent intuition. I think we hear about it in a lot of stories, and sometimes we let the opinion of others push us away from the fact that, hey, there's something here that's not quite right. And rather than dismissing that, sometimes leaning into that and looking for how can we selfishly address this feeling that I'm feeling, which is then going to help my child hopefully lead a better life through being able to communicate in a more effective way.
Absolutely. I completely agree.
And if you were to talk to a parent right now, what's one piece of advice you would give them? It can be about speech therapy, it can be about just life in general. Give me just one thing that somebody with your experience would go, hey, here's what I think you need to know.
I think the first thing that I would say is to allow yourself permission to grow and to also be patient with yourself. We so often want to be perfect at it. We so often want to get to this level of excellence so quickly. When we can allow ourselves permission that says, this is something new and I'm going to learn, that is a huge step, because not only are we allowing that in ourselves and we're taking away that need for anxiety and need to rush and be so perfect at something, we're also showing our children it's okay. I'm learning too. I'm growing too. And it helps them understand that they're not supposed to be perfect at something out of the gate and that perfect doesn't exist. Excellence can be built upon, that can be pursued. Perfection, not so much. And when we can do that, when we can allow ourselves permission to grow, and when we can be patient with ourselves, we can truly find that supportive self talk and navigate through so many things so much easier.
What's one thing you're doing at the moment to help yourself grow?
One thing I'm doing, my
Yes.
supportive self talk is very, very important to me. And it was something that I used to think, especially when it comes to positive thinking. I used to think, oh, I'll never have another negative thought ever again. And boy, oh boy, was that bunch of baloney. And it's understanding that my self talk is something that I have to be very aware of. And I can be supportive in my self talk. Now, that doesn't mean everything is rainbows and sunshine. It does mean I can kindly talk to myself and I can also encourage myself and I can have that tough love that says, you know what, we're getting a little too laxed here. We need to pick it up. Or, you know what, you've been going really hard and I'm proud of you. You need to take a break. And being able to find that balance is so important because our culture, and I'm not sure what your culture might be like. I know over here on the East Coast, especially in the Northeast, it is a lot of caffeine and a lot of hustling and a lot of go, go, go. And it's not something that's sustainable. It's about finding that balance. And that truly is something that I find very important, very specifically for me.
And I think sometimes there's times to push and there's times where you've got to hold back. And I think that self understanding of the type of person you are is really important when it comes to self talk. I know for me, I'm a bit similar to what you've said, where it's like I need to sometimes take it a little bit easier on myself because my default mode is to be hard on myself and
Mhm.
you know can get into a whole conversation about where that's come from and why it is like it is because that's kind of the voice that I've grown up with. And I
Mhm.
guess to tie it all in a bow and to relate it back comes back to helping your children be able to communicate better because the voice that you can help them communicate with now in their early stages is probably going to be that same voice that's going to talk to them into their later years.
Very much so. Very, very much so. I completely agree with you.
That's so to finish off, do you want to just let the audience know where they can find you, where they can reach out to you for your services, and let them know, what the process is to begin if they'd like to talk to you and, you know, inquire about working with you?
Absolutely. Thank you so much. The best way to reach out to us is to visit betterspeech.com. And I know we'll have all the social media things in the show notes, but the best way and the fastest way to work with a board certified speech language pathologist is simply visit betterspeech.com and it'll walk you through the 1, 2, 3 quick steps. And we can get you connected with a speech pathologist as early as the next day in some cases. So it's pretty fantastic that we have technology, as we mentioned earlier, that can support this.
That's great. That's wonderful. Well, thank you so much for sharing everything you did. Hopefully, everyone's able to get some usable bits of information out of all the info that you shared there. It was really good. I really enjoyed our conversation and thank you so much. I will
Thank you
talk
so
to
much.
everyone next week.